Hi, I'm Chris with Sanderson Test Prep, and in this series we are going to go through all the steps to create a game that looks something like this for our final codes. This is a fun little space game where you can move around and try to dodge obstacles and get reward points for collecting diamonds. And it keeps track of your score. You lose a few points if you get hit by an obstacle, you get a few points if you get each diamond, and so forth. So fun little game. We're going to walk through all the steps and the process of creating a game like this. So for now, let's start with our first introduction to GameLab. And when you get to GameLab at code.org, if you first open it up, you'll actually see something that looks like this that has a function already on there called function draw. And you'll see it either as a block, or if you click over here on the top right for show text, you'll see it written out as text. And for right now, we will certainly get into how to utilize that function, but for lesson one, let's just start with a background. Let's talk about a few different ways that we can introduce a background. So what you'll notice about the blocks that you have under each of these sections for world, groups, control, sprites, functions, etc. So they do organize the blocks where some of the most commonly used blocks or features of each of these sections will be at the top. So instead of just making it alphabetical, there is actually a lot of thought behind the structure where they have these different components within each section. So here for background, this is one of the first elements that we'll deal with. And right now it says background white. So let's see what happens if we click run. I don't really know if that worked or not because a blank background looks white and this background of white doesn't really let us know if that background has actually done anything. So let's try changing that color. What if we change the background to red and then hit run? Okay, that worked. So we can select from a few of these pre-existing colors, right? Red, blue, yellow, etc. But if you notice down here, you'll also have an option for RGB, which stands for red, green, blue. And that's going to be where you can customize your color a little bit more. So say you want something, and it goes up to 255. So say you want something that's mostly red, and we can make that value maybe 100, but then you want like a little bit of green and a little bit of blue in there. And let's see what that color looks like. So this way you can play around with these numbers and customize your color as you would like for a given background. And then if you notice, one other option that we have down here has that same RGB, the red, green, blue, but then it has this other number here which we see set to 0.5. Let's see what that does. So if I hit run, I notice it's a red background, but it doesn't look like the red background that we saw before where it was very strong. And this last number that we see here, the 0.5, this is something called transparency. And so that's going to allow you to make something perfectly opaque, which means really dark, really bold. So if we were to set that to 1, then we would see that same bold red that we saw before. And this value is going to go for this last value for transparency between 0 and 1. And so if you did, let's say 0.2, something very light, so you would still see that red background, but it's much softer, and it's going to be a more transparent version of that same red. So those are all the tools that we would need to set our background color. Now let's see if we wanted to set a background image. This part's going to work a little bit differently. So here, take off background for right now, and we're going to take a look at how we would set a background as an image. And this is going to be by introducing something called sprites. So if you go over to animation, we can see here, I have a couple old ones. I'm going to go ahead and take those out. And we'll just introduce something brand new. So if you go over to animation, let's click new animation. And you can see here that they already have some backgrounds. So let's check these out and let's try Desert Road. Let's see what this looks like. So it looks like this as a background. And I recommend you're going to have to refer to the title of this animation. So I recommend, if you can, to retitle it as something very simple and direct because you're going to have to type it into your code, and depending how often you're pulling up a certain background in your game, you might have to reference it many times. So it's easiest if it has a really straightforward and easy name to reproduce. So let's call this road, and let's see how we could introduce that into our background. So a sprite is going to be basically you're going to use this for backgrounds, you're going to use this for objects or characters in your game. If there's a car, if there's some sort of vehicle, if there's a character running across a screen, whatever it is. And so we're going to name this one road. And when it says create sprite, those two numbers that you see are the position of it. And right now we're going to leave those at 200, 200, which means it's going to be right centered in the middle of our screen. But we will start experimenting with that a little bit more in future lessons as to how to change those values when we want to place a character or an object at a particular part on the screen. So right now we can introduce this variable, and if we hit run, let's see what happens. So nothing seems to happen there. And we have this little triangle which says road is defined, but it's not called in your program. So here we have to reference this animation. So this is going to be where it says sprite.setAnimation. So this is going to be for road, and the animation that we're going to reference is that animation of road, which we saw over here. If you click on toggle back and forth between code and animation, if we click on animation, we see that the road animation is what we are referencing when it says road set animation to road. So let's hit run there and see what happens. Still nothing yet. So there's one tool that whenever we're introducing this idea of an animation or an object or a sprite in our game, we're going to have to at some point draw it. And so that's going to be this statement that you see here, draw sprites. So this is going to, the functionality here is going to allow us to actually draw it. And then if we hit run, now we have a background on the screen. And so those are the ways that we can introduce backgrounds. So just to recap, you can go to animation. You can click on any type of new animation that you would like, and they have some pre-existing backgrounds that you can select from. But you can also draw your own or even upload an image from your computer. And just remember, whatever title you give it here, that's the title that you have to reference in your code when you're setting that animation and you're creating that sprite or that object and then drawing it. So that'll draw in that background. And you can also, if you want to keep it simple, remember under the drawing tab here, if you click background color and pull that over, that's where you can set the background to any color that you want. Choose from the pre-existing colors already included in the library or set your own using the RGB functionality. So hopefully that's a helpful introduction for how we can introduce different kinds of backgrounds that we would want for our game. In our next lesson, we'll take a look at how we can introduce characters into the game. And in our third lesson, we'll start to introduce ways that we can get those characters to move around the screen and interact with other objects on the screen. So for more, stay tuned and check out our other videos. Thanks for watching.